Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at mitigating ARP attacks. We'll be discussing Dynamic ARP Inspection, Dynamic ARP Inspection Implementation Guidelines, and then finally, we'll look at a Dynamic ARP Inspection Configuration Example. This episode is part of my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials for the Cisco Certified Network Associate, also known as the CCNA. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. What we have is to mitigate these ARP attacks, where a threat actor, he sends some unsolicited ARP requests, changing MAC addresses to IP addresses, changing that in all the devices and on the switches. The MAC address here of the threat actor and the IP address of the default gateway, he manipulates them in such a way that all traffic goes through the threat actor. So he's able to get all the traffic in, see it, and then he sends it on to give the illusion that the network is working correctly. We use Dynamic ARP Inspection here to do this. And part of Dynamic ARP Inspection requires that we use DHCP snooping. Now, to prevent an ARP attack, a couple things we have to do is not relaying the invalid or what we call the gratuitous ARP replies, something that threat actor made up to redirect traffic through his device. We intercept all the ARP requests and replies on untrusted ports. Once again, an untrusted port is one we don't trust. Untrusted ports are typically all of your access ports. You trust only the ones you know and you can control on the other end. This is servers. This is connections to other switches. Those are about the only trusted ones you have. Then you verify each intercepted packet for a valid IP to MAC address binding. We build in a binding table when we do DHCP snooping. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't come from a valid source, we're going to drop that and we're going to log it. And just to build a log up to see where is there a problem. And eventually we're going to air disable that interface. The system is going to turn it off. Now to get access back, you have to go into that interface as an administrator, shut it down, do a shutdown command on it, and then do a no shutdown. You can do those two lines back to back, shutdown, no shutdown, and that gets it out of air disable mode. But make sure you take care of the problem before you do that. Otherwise, you're probably going to have to come back in there and enable that port again. To enable Dynamic ARP Inspection, there's some guidelines we should follow. First one is enabling DHCP snooping. So enable DHCP snooping. We enable this in two places. We enable this globally on our device, on our switch. So we enable it globally. And then you also do it on selected VLANs. VLANs specifically where end users can connect into, where the threat actor could walk up and plug his device into a port on the wall that goes into a port on your switch and into that VLAN. You want to make sure you've got DHCP turned on those VLANs that those ports connect to. Other thing we want to do is we want to enable our Dynamic ARP Inspection on selected VLANs also. Usually these selected VLANs for DHCP snooping and these selected VLANs for Dynamic ARP Inspection are the same, but there can be cases where they would differ some. And then the last one we want to do is create trusted interfaces. We want to create those trusted interfaces. That would be on devices that we know connect into other devices underneath our administrative control, that we trust, that we know. In this diagram, we have a connection between a switch and a router. That port, Fast Ethernet 24 right here, that connects into the router. We turn that into a trusted port. All the other ports we don't do anything with. By default, that makes them untrusted. And here in this diagram, we have a PC connected into Fast Ethernet 01. We didn't trust it, so it's untrusted. We have Fast Ethernet 02. That's where our threat actor has plugged his device in. We don't trust it, so it's an untrusted port. Because they're untrusted, we can do some limiting and maybe even shut those ports down if we see some traffic we don't like. Configuring Dynamic ARP Resolution Protocol is a couple step process. Here's an example. First one we have to do is turn on IP DHCP snooping. You turn it on first, and then you go in and you say, okay, let's apply it to certain VLANs. First step is we turned it on globally. That's this one. And then we apply it to certain VLANs. If I had to guess in this example, VLAN 10 is where all of your end users connect into. This is where it is. Once you have that set up, let's go ahead and turn on Dynamic ARP Inspection. The command here is IP ARP Inspection, and then what VLAN do you want it to apply to? So we turned DHCP snooping on globally, DHCP snooping on for VLAN 10, and then Dynamic ARP Inspection on VLAN 10. We turn those on. After that, you go into an interface. And for our example, Fast Ethernet 024 went from our switch into a router. Once again, it's underneath our administrative control. We trust that connection, so we're not going to limit that traffic. And what we do is once we're in that interface, we can say, okay, for IP DHCP snooping, we're going to trust it. And then for IP ARP inspection, Dynamic ARP Inspection, we're also going to trust it. So that way, none of our limits will be applied to that connection going to the router. Dynamic ARP Inspection can also be configured to check MAC addresses and IP addresses. It can look at that destination MAC address. It can look at the destination MAC address in the Ethernet header and then compare it against the target MAC address in the ARP body. If they don't match, we can delete it. Same thing we can do with the source MAC address. We can look at that source MAC address in the Ethernet header and compare it to the sender MAC address. And if those don't match up, we can drop those frames also. We can also check the ARP body for invalid or unexpected IP addresses, including all zeros or all ones, broadcast to everything address, or even any multicast addresses. We can check for that. If we find any of those, we'll drop those packets also. To configure Dynamic ARP Inspection, what we can do is from global configuration mode, type in IP ARP Inspection, and then we're going to set our validation parameters. Here we typed in validate and put a space question mark, and we can see that we have 3 different options we can do. We can do destination MAC, IP, and source. Now, to enter this in from global configuration mode, we type in IP ARP Inspection validate source MAC. That's if we only want to do source MAC address. If we want to do destination MAC addresses, we type in IP ARP Inspection validate destination MAC address. If we want to do just IP addresses, ARP IP Inspection validate IP. What this does is every time you enter in this command, it overwrites the previous setting. And so when we entered in source MAC, then we entered in destination MAC, it overwrote source MAC. Then we came down here and we did IP ARP Inspection validate IP. It overwrote destination MAC. And so when we do a show run and include anything with the validate, this is the command we get. This is the last line we have. We are only doing validation of the IP address. If we want to do all 3, what we have to do is list those options all at the end. Here's the command, IP ARP Inspection validate, and then we list out all 3, source MAC, destination MAC, and IP. Go ahead and do a show run to include anything that has the word validate, and we can see in our running configuration, this is how we're set up, and then we have our source MAC, destination MAC, and IP address. All 3 we're looking for. If you do it 1 per line, it will overwrite it. If you put all 3 on 1 line, you will do all the validation. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on mitigating ARP attacks. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com. There you can find out how to get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials for the CCNA. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on switching, routing, and wireless essentials for the CCNA. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.